Good morning. It is Monday, September 26, 2022, and this is DC Signal to Noise. Since we last talked, harvest in the middle of the country had its most active week. House Republicans want to know more about USDA spending plans. U.S. equities reflected increasing concerns about recession here in the U.S. and around the globe. The Yankees' Aaron Judge sits on 60 home runs with just 3 games left. And NASA this morning launched a double asteroid redirection test, or DART. It's going to slam a spacecraft into an asteroid to see if they can change the direction of the asteroid. And, Jim, we talk about unintended consequences of a government action all the time. There had better not be any unintended consequences of this little DART test.
No, you think I got pretty good faith in our NASA people still. But the reason they're doing this is if we did have one in the future, it could take out about half the continent. So
yeah,
I think it's a test worth taking.
Yeah. Well, it also makes me wonder if they're taking the test if they haven't already identified the asteroid that
they probably
that is taking aim at the Earth.
I'm not ruling anything out nowadays.
That's exactly right. Good morning, Jim. That's Pro Farmer Policy Analyst Jim Wiesemeyer. I am AgriTalk host Chip Flory. Glad that you are with us.
I do want to update you. I think you said only 3 games left. I think there's 9 games left.
What? Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think.
Well, it's not nearly as. See, that shows you how much this Cubs fan is paying attention this late in the season. Not much at all. Not much at all. All right. Good morning to you all. We're going to get to okay. Well, Melody's coming with a question right off the bat that I think I can answer right away, because the question is, what is the difference in how USDA and Pro Farmer calculate their projections? Huge differences. Number one, USDA does a survey of 55,000 farmers for every crop production report. It may even be more than that, but that I think is something like the responses that they get. So that right there is a huge difference. The other thing is they've got a very random driven process in selecting their objective yield plots. We have a random process as well. But the difference is they go back to that same spot in September, October, November, if the crop is still standing. And then once the crop is harvested, they'll go back and get down on their hands and knees and find how much corn, how many soybeans are left in the field in that plot area. So in other words, they measure the biological yield while it is standing, take the harvest loss off of it to give you the actual harvest yield. Pro Farmer's way of doing it is down the road every 15 to 20 miles. We stop, we pull, without getting into too much detail, we pull about 1,700 corn samples, 1,700 soybean samples. And then we've got 2 different yield calculations that use the same data sets. One accounts for the size of the kernel around the size of the kernel based on the number of rows around the ear, which is always too low. And the other one does not make that adjustment, which is normally too high. You take the average of the 2, and it usually gets us pretty doggone close to what the average is. So, yeah, good question, Melody. That's a way to get my engine up and running right away on a Monday morning. Get that question out of the way. We will take on some of these other questions as we go. But
yeah, and I'll add a cotton thing. I got another cotton industry analyst that I talked with over the weekend, Chip, and it's in my updates on profarmer.com. But long answer short, that when you look at the failed acreage and the certified data through the 578s, it appears NASS is too high on harvested acres by about 500,000 acres. So we're going to see. It's something to watch.
Okay, we're going to go to this question from Carl right away too, Jim, because this is one of my favorite subjects again. The question on environmental, social, and governance, ESG. Does the Security Exchange Commission's plan to require corporations to report an ESG score have any legs? If this were imposed, farmers doing business with publicly traded companies would have to quantify and report things like greenhouse gas emissions, everything from bovine flatulence to carbon release through silage and excuse me, through tillage. Yeah, absolutely, it would. I don't know if it's got any legs. And boy, when you take a look at what the NPPC, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, National Corn Growers, American Soybean Growers, they are all taking up efforts to prevent this from happening.
And House leadership, especially if they get back into power after November 8th elections, is telling corporations, be careful how close you go on this one, Chip. So it's a concern, but I think the legs are being knocked out from under it.
Right. Right. All right. Gary's got an update on one. I don't know if we can check this or not real quick, Jim, but an issue that we've been talking about, continue to monitor. He says a couple of updates. First Rail Union Aerospace voted no. We'll have to check that out.
I'll have to check on that. Yeah, because we're going to go into October before we see the final results,
right.
and I'd have to see whether or not they can go back and vote it again, Gary. But we'll check on it.
Right. And trade and movement is opening up between Canada and the U.S., and it looks like the border restrictions are coming off.
Well, you're seeing that around the world now. Japan is trying to get more tourists, etc. So yes, I think that's a good sign.
Right. Right. All right, Gary, we'll get into the school lunch costs because that is on the topic for today. Wow. Jim, I don't know if we've ever launched into a signal to noise quite like that before or not, but here we go. Let's take a look at some of the things that happened last week. This is one that I think is flying under the radar a little bit, but I think is very important, and that is Chinese soybean meal prices are trading at a record high right now. And it's because they're running out of beans. They're trying to say that the crush margins were lost because there wasn't as much demand coming from the livestock markets. If there isn't any demand from the livestock markets, how are we trading meal at record highs? Of course there is demand from livestock. The problem is they haven't wanted to pay the high prices and lock in those prices for too long of a period of time, and now they're starting to pay the consequences.
Absolutely, Chip. You're spot on. And also, remember, Bloomberg had that report late last week, I think Friday, that they purchased a lot of Argentine soybeans, so much in just a few weeks that they did the entire prior year. So, and they're getting out of their strategic pork stocks too. So all indications are that they're going to be a big purchaser of pork, beef in the months ahead, and also soybeans.
Right. Yeah. As long as unless they keep shutting the country down with their COVID
that is true
restrictions.
Yeah, that would be the only governor, I think, on them.
Exactly. And that's why some people are thinking that the COVID restrictions and the COVID shutdowns are their way of limiting food use in some of these regions. That's a scary, scary situation. Yeah. I don't want to let this one get away from us either, because EPA withdrew the interim decision on glyphosate, which is, of course, the active ingredient in Roundup. We can use it. We're going to be able to continue to use it, and they're not going to complete the registration review now until 2026.
4 more years. Yeah. Chip, I got emails and telephone calls Friday from some very smart people saying, what does this mean? Because the gobbledygook from the government and EPA. Bottom line, you said it. You can still use glyphosate.
Yeah. Yeah. Catalog feed report was out on Friday. Basically, I don't think it's going to have a whole lot of impact on price action today, but USDA says it is going to basically implement part of the Cattle Market Price Discovery and Transparency Act by mandating the cattle contract reporting, Jim.
Yes, and they put a notice out to the ag sector late last week, and it didn't take very long to NAMI, the North American Meat Association, to fire back at them. Now, USDA says they have the authority through the livestock mandatory livestock price reporting. But as I said on AgriTalk, I think this is going to end up in court. But this bridges us in, Chip, to the House Ag Committee Republicans fired off a letter late last week to USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack saying, wait a minute, look at all these executive fiats from the White House and USDA. So, they want some answers.
Okay, so that's the bottom line on this, on the contract library. I think it's a good thing. I just want it to happen the right way. Some of the climate smart farming practices that are proposed and being supported through the CCC funds, I think they're good things. I just don't know if they're being supported and funded the right way. It's almost like they've just decided, hey, these are good ideas. Doesn't matter what Congress, if Congress isn't going to move on it, we're going to do it ourselves.
Yeah. They've seen the mandates are the quickest road to get where they want to go. Transparency is usually always the better approach. You're right, Chip, but it's how you get there.
Yeah. Food prices. Let's talk about that real quick here, Jim. USDA raised the outlook for all food prices in grocery store prices in 2022. Food price inflation now forecast to rise 9% to 10%, and food at home up 10.5 to 11.5%. That's the most since 1979 and 74, respectively. Food away from home prices still forecast to rise 6.5 to 7.5%. Well, that's because we've already seen a lot of the increase there. This is something that is real for a majority of U.S. families, Jim. How are we going to pay for that next meal?
It's the grocery prices. And if the major media were doing their job, which they aren't in a major way, Chip, the Sunday news program should have had Secretary Vilsack on relative to the food price situation, and the top economist, by the way. Again, I hate to fault USDA, but they have been way behind the curve on these food price forecasts. I mean, they continue to increase. Do they not shop at supermarkets?
I don't know.
They ought to be able to project rather than follow the trend. But the White House, let's bridge. The White House has basically a food security confab, the first time since the Nixon administration at the White House. Now, there were some major policy moves following the Nixon event. And there are going to be some pushes. They're going to use this. Yep. Additional food stamps.
Yes,
some big time increases and other things. And they wound up being good type programs, spending a lot of money, however. So watch in the months following this confab. Biden's going to speak at it. Vilsack's going to speak at it. This thing will be used as a platform for food policy initiatives.
Gary hit us with the school lunch or school nutrition programs. School lunch costs: breakfast is $1.60, lunch is $3, and milk is 45 cents. I mean, I remember when it was 30. I think the lunch was 35 cents.
I remember.
Yeah. And there was no breakfast. And boy, you could buy an extra, little pint thing or half pint thing of milk.
We got chocolate milk all the time.
Well, sure, of course. Thank you, Gary. And by the way, if anyone else would like to participate, look for the comments tab on your screen and click on that. And as you can see, we will try to get to your questions or your comments include it in the conversation here. Jim, just before we went on, you mentioned that there was a sustainable aviation fuel roadmap that was talked about on Friday. What was that?
Released Friday. And it is an interesting report, Chip. We know their goals into 2030 and the future 2050, but this is the roadmap. And I do like transparency on this one, Chip, of what agencies have to do what in order to get there. So link to the report. We have a link on profarmer.com to the report. But this shows you at least they have a glide path to perhaps get to where they want to be, Chip, in the future. And you've quoted Vilsack, periodically as saying he wants an aggressive use for this for the next
Yeah.
few years. And of course, it has an ag impact because of the oilseed plantings.
Absolutely. Well,
And
yeah,
ethanol. You can use ethanol for this, but
that's right. And
primary beef.
we are finding out as some latest technology that I just started to read about over the weekend. They're making it out of CO2.
Yes. That's the innovation of
Yeah.
America that I love. So
Yeah.
once they see a potential money,
Yeah.
then you'll get the technology to follow.
Yep. I don't know if we're going to get there on the batters or not, but that's a debate for another time.
Yes.
There's more and more people that are coming over to my side that it just ain't going to work.
It'll work.
Okay. One last thing from last week. Talk to me about the election results in Italy.
We have the first so-called fascist since Mussolini.
Yeah.
And I mean, she's a character. Some people call her, not that Trump is fascist, Trump with skirt. I mean, she's pretty aggressive now, and she did win, and her party. It's a major change. Now, the EU officials, even last week, knew what was coming, and they issued a warning to her that you cannot go against the EU principles. So they're a little concerned which way that she'll go, but she's already created some social issues, Chip, relative to the LGBT community and other aspects. Very controversial.
Yeah. Okay.
Far
Uh,
right, far right.
all
She's
right.
far right.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to know how to ruin a Saturday, there's a couple of ways to do it. Number one, Big 12 refs in a Big 12 football game. That will ruin a Saturday. Turnovers, just disaster. Disaster turnovers. That will ruin your Saturday. A text from Jim Wiesemeyer saying, ignore these rumors of a coup in China.
I
That
even,
will also ruin a Saturday.
I had ruined mine because I had some big traders, okay, not big in size, I mean important, and they've been around a while, saying, is there any truth to this? I said, where are you getting this stuff? And then I checked with one of the better China watchers, Bill Bishop.
Yep.
And he said it was from a service that doesn't have a good track record at all. And we got his bottom line, and it was BS.
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 Yeah.
That's all I needed.
Yep.
That's what we call smart brevity.
Yeah. Very good.
But you always got to check these out. But,
Yeah.
but it's because Xi has
Jim,
not been seen for a few days. They're
right.
going into a big important meeting in October, Chip. This is not unusual. We've seen the same thing
Now,
with in North Korea.
the other comment from Bill was maybe too much wishful thinking
Yes.
on the
Yes.
part of some people.
Absolutely.
So there is, I mean, nobody's going to, well, I shouldn't say nobody would encourage a coup, but if it starts to happen, who's going to slow it down?
That's true. That is true. And so the protest, you can see we're paid, Chip, to connect dots all the time as reporters and analysts. And look at the protest in Russia and in Iran. And probably protest in China relative to their lockdown. So there's this theme here. But I mean, it's getting big in both Iran and Russia, where they've thrown at least 2,000 people in jail in Russia already. And that's probably a very understated total.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It looks, let's stay on Russia because it looks like the Kremlin is going to attempt to complete an annexation of 4 areas that Russian troops have occupied in Ukraine. And they may try to make it happen this week.
Oh yeah, they'll try. Of course, it was by the gun. At gun, will you sign this document? So what do you do? But a lot of Ukrainians aren't even in the areas, Chip. But it's a sham. Most of the world is saying they won't certify it, things like that. But it's 101 in Putin's playbook, Chip.
Right. Right. Okay. The US dollar, Jim, in the overnight session traded as high as 114.53. I don't know when that's when we've been higher, but it's going to go back to 2000 probably.
Well, yeah, and there's a lack of coordination right now, but I'm telling you, look what China is trying to do some things with the yuan or the renminbi.
Mhm.
As I said before, the British pound is being pounded because they don't like that the UK, with their recent announcements to instill their economy, is having to borrow so much money. But its currency is big play right now. And remember, when you were editor of Pro Farmer, Chip, I believe it was on page 2. You had a whole section on outside markets.
Oh yeah.
We're back to that time right
Yeah,
now.
oh, absolutely.
We're there.
Absolutely. That's
Yep.
right. Yeah, it absolutely matters. Um, Here comes Hurricane Ian getting ready to slam into the Gulf Coast. And don't look now, Mr. Biden, but your gas prices are working their way back to the upside.
Yes.
And
And
Hurricane Ian is part of the reason.
that's part of it. You've got Europe starting with the cooler temperatures, Chip.
Hmm.
So that's all sooner than expected. So yeah, we're going. Even though the Brent, the international global mark, and the WTI for U.S. crude was down again today, Chip. So,
Hmm.
but this thing could change on a dime.
Yeah, certainly can. And the European situation is something that we're going to keep a very close eye on. Energy markets, actually, WTI has now turned higher. It's trading
Okay.
about 50 cents higher, but it's still just under $80.
Yes.
So that's a big difference. Okay, let's get to the week ahead. Wow, we got to keep moving here, dude. Because number one thing on the priority list has got to be the continuing resolution, right?
Yes. And through all the huffs and puffs, as I wrote, it's the Democrats this time,
Yep.
House Democrats, who don't like this permitting process that sometimes centrist Senator Joe Manchin is pushing. Okay.
Love
But
that.
I think they'll come to an agreement by the end of the week, Chip. The curious one, let's say I'm correct. Okay, let's go on from there. What's going to be added to this? It doesn't look like many disaster aid funding, maybe for New England, maybe for Pakistan, situations like that. But that's going to be punted until December after the elections. Ag disaster funding is coming, just not in this continuing resolution. Aid for Ukraine will definitely be part of this, Chip.
Yeah. But Manchin's getting double crossed on this deal, isn't he?
Well, he should have known. I think that's why I said he's sometimes centrist. He was feeling the heat on getting the so-called Inflation Reduction Act through. So he came up with this one, Chip. But I think that they'll eventually find the Republican votes for the permitting
Okay.
as well, because it takes 60 votes in the Senate. I think he'll find enough. He'll find enough.
Okay. Well, I started hearing it this morning, well, actually over the weekend a little bit. Some of the middle of the country lawmakers saying, if the federal government shuts down, I don't think people in my state would even notice. We're going to hear that talk, and we're going
Yeah.
to hear it a lot this week. Trust me, they will notice.
They will notice. Yes, we've been through
Absolutely.
this
Yeah.
before, and it costs money. And the government workers are repaid for any loss. Thank do we not ever learn from mistakes anymore?
Yeah.
Other things this week, Chip. It looks like Doug McCallop has hit a
Okay.
snag. He's the proposal for chief ag negotiator at the USDR, Chip. It was supposed to be this week, but a Democratic senator has put a hold on this because he wants USTR to be more transparent in their negotiations on trade issues. So we have that to look at, Chip.
Okay. Uh, what is in the continuing resolution, back to that if we can. This FDA user fee, you mentioned it, I think, just last week.
And
What
this week.
exactly is it?
Well, it's so they can do some user fees that even enough Republicans are going to go along with. Otherwise, they're going to have to shut down a big portion of FDA. They need that funding, Chip. So it's very important in
Okay.
the food safety industry, and it will be part of the stopgap spending bill.
Okay, and there's going to be more money in the CR for Ukraine.
For Ukraine, yeah, it's anywhere from just billions of dollars more. But increasingly, that's where, if the Republicans get control of the House, I'm not quite sure it's going to be, quote, as easy to get that funding as we've seen.
I know we keep saying that it's a proxy war, Jim, and I believe that. I absolutely believe it. But if it is, go win it. End this thing. Go win it right now.
Yes.
Ah.
I agree, and I'm not a warmonger, but you
right
started here.
No, you don't have to be a warmonger to say go win it. A warmonger is there before the whole thing starts.
Yes.
Okay, and they encourage it and get and grease the skids to make the war happen. Let's just end this thing.
This is why Biden is correct on this one, Chip, when he calls it Putin's war, not Russia's war.
I'll go with that.
He continues to miscalculate on it, and it's getting to the serious time. And
yes,
he's into a corner right now, and now he's got more soldiers from his country, even though it's coming from certain areas that is raising questions about who is part of this 300,000 build up, but he keeps miscalculating, and that's always a concern, Chip.
Yeah, he's more dangerous right now than what he was when the invasion started.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's going to impact the Ukraine grain going out when that ends. In November, he's going to rewrite the rules on that one. So
there's no
that'll be in the wheat market. I'm telling you, that'll be a grain market factor.
Yep.
And Friday this week, we got big economic reports with the Fed's preferred inflation gauge coming out, the PCE. And then, of course, at USDA, we have the small grain summary and the grain stocks report. And the grain stocks report can usually be a wild card, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Even though we just got an update on what USDA World Ag Outlook Board thinks the carryover is going to be just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
Now's when we zero in on what the 2021-22 ending stocks will be for corn and soybeans. And don't forget, on Thursday, we also get the quarterly hogs and pigs report.
Yes, I forgot that. Absolutely. Yep. And, and before we go, Chip, I do want to point out a really interesting report in the Wall Street Journal. Basically, their headline was, "Are we running out of land in spacious U.S.?" And what they meant was easily usable land to build new homes, and that's apparently due to regulation, some other factors that builders are finding it increasingly hard, and more than a few are looking at farmland to turn that over to housing markets. So that's one I would behoove you to read that. It's a well-researched report.
Yeah. Okay, very good. And the 6th annual 5-day National Clean Energy Week kicks off in Washington, D.C. Should be a good week for ethanol.
It should be. A potpourri of speakers are at it. So we're going to have a lot of energy and food news this week, and that speaks of agriculture right there.
All right. We talked about it last week. You want to see Judge get the record, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I watch all the Yankees. Now I know the Yankees players, and so I watch them every game. And I was watching Friday night because I have Apple TV Plus, and he didn't hit it, but Pujols hit 2 that night. So
$699 and $700.
Yeah, I was just so happy for him. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
He's a
That
good
was
guy.
cool to see.
Good guy.
That was really cool to see. And, when I watch the Yankees, I can actually watch one of my favorite Cubs, Rizzo, play.
Absolutely.
So.
And he's done pretty good for him.
Yeah.
He's got, 30 homers, I guess.
Well, yeah, he's one of the reasons that they're in the position that they're in. And,
I agree.
And,
solid player, consistent.
Yep, it's a lot of fun. All right. Today on AgriTalk, this morning, we got Machinery Pete lined up, ready to go. This afternoon, we've got Mark Hobrock from the Andersons. That's this afternoon at 2:06 Central Time. Jim, have a great week. You all have a great week. Keep watching for those signals.